As we explore the bottom of the U this week, I want to take a moment and this clip to explore the relationship between the two main frameworks that are the foundation of our u.lab journey and this MOOC. The framework of the iceberg model of current reality and the framework of the U process. And as you may remember, when I introduced the iceberg model during the first week, it's basically a model that helps us to make sense of what's currently going on in the world around us. It is asking the question, what are the deeper systemic forces that keep us collectively reenacting the results that no one wants, in the form of the ecological divide, the socioeconomic divide, and the spiritual divide, and so forth. One of the most helpful conversations I had on how to investigate this deeper realm of systemic forces has been with Peter Senge, the author of The Fifth Discipline. Shortly I arrived here at the, back then, the MIT Learning Center. And I asked him a question around that. And he responded by sharing the story of a conversation he just returned from in Hong Kong with a revered Chinese educator who integrated, his name was Master Nan, and he integrated Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism in his teaching. And he had asked him a question in regard to the environmental and social economic crisis of our time. And Peter then shared that Master Nan was shaking his head, and he said, there's only one real issue in the world, and that is the reintegration of matter and mind. There's only one real issue in the world, the reintegration between matter and mind. When I heard these words, suddenly I started to see this type of social reality and the issues that we face from a deeper level, from a level that is asking if, what if everything we see up here is a function of a systemic disconnect on a much deeper level? And what really is that systemic disconnect that Master Nan referred to in terms of matter and mind, but that in the case of the social field, in the case of social reality, we really need to investigate what it really is. That kind of question was triggered or awakened in my mind back then in this conversation. And it's really at the root of both the iceberg model and the theory U model. When I started to explore this question a little more, and as you may remember from the first week, the first thing you notice is there's really not just one thing. There's like a whole set of structural disconnects that are really important and that matter a lot in terms of the problem symptoms that we see up here. So let me just remind us by naming a few. The structural disconnect between the finite resources that we have on Earth and the infinite growth paradigm. The disconnect between haves and have-nots. The disconnect between the financial and the real economy. The disconnect between the R&D, the technology spending, and the real that's actually going on and the real needs in society. Remember the movie that many of you probably saw in the first week, Fire and the Blood? It's a great example of that point, kind of the structural disconnect of where the real problems are and where the R&D technology spending is going. The disconnect between the systemic leadership that we have today and the real challenges that we face. The disconnect between GDP on the one hand and well-being on the other hand. As we know, in most developed economies, in most so-called developed countries, more GDP does not translate into more well-being. So we produce more, we consume more, but we are not more happy. Our well-being is no longer related to that increasing output, and so on and so forth, kind of the governance issues and ownership issues. You all are aware of them, and more detail is in Chapter 2 of the Leading from the Emerging Future book, and also on the website in our Week 1 material. But the real question is this: what really is underneath? What is it that's kind of driving all these disconnects? And what's driving them, kind of from this kind of iceberg point of view, is thought. It's the quality of economic thought. And when we look at the current paradigm of economic thought, what's the blind spot of that paradigm? The blind spot, apart from externalities, is consciousness. Current economic theory assumes that we all operate from an ecosystem awareness. However, in reality, we see that whenever the awareness of actors in the system is shifting, also the patterns of relationship, the patterns of collaboration, the patterns of results that a system can enact is also shifting. And that's the type of economic theory that we haven't developed yet, and that I think will be at the core of kind of developing a deeper response to the current global crisis. And to address these issues, areas, kind of from that deeper level, our outdated paradigms of economic thought requires us to rethink the key categories of economic thinking in each of these key issue areas, which results into rethinking nature as something that we, in the old paradigm of economic thinking, conceptualize in terms of a commodity that we can, buy, use, and then throw away, to an ecosystem commons, to something that we cultivate together and that we hand over to the next generation in a better condition of cultivation than we received it. We need to rethink labor from jobs to something that is activating our deeper capacities to create social and business entrepreneurship. We need to rethink money from extractive financial capital to intentional capital that is focusing on regenerating the cultural, social, and ecological commons. We need to rethink technology from something that's purely system-centric, optimizing systems, to something that is, as Jeremy Rifkin describes this in his third industrial revolution, something that's more ecosystem-centric and that is more human-centric, that helps us to activate and realize the deeper creative capacities that we have as individuals and as communities. We need to rethink leadership from heroic individuals to cultivating the collective capacity to co-sense and co-shape the future. We need to rethink consumption from the old paradigm of consumerism to collaborative conscious consumption. And we need to measure the progress, innovate how we measure progress from GDP to concepts that really focus on the progress in terms of well-being and happiness. And we need to rethink governance from organizing around the old forms of governance, hierarchy and competition, to organizing around collective impact, where we bring together multiple stakeholders and make them collaborate in a way that is resulting in the impact that these stakeholders want to create together. And lastly, we need to rethink ownership from something that is only organized around these two forms, state ownership and private ownership, towards creating a third category of ownership, which is commons-based ownership rights that are designed to protecting and safeguarding the generations, the interest of the next generation. So let me wrap up what I have been saying here. Number one, to address these key challenges of our time, we need to inquire into the deeper systemic disconnects. Number two, in order to address these 8 systemic disconnects that we have been describing, we have to inquire into the deeper driving forces that keep us reenacting them, which leads us, number 3, to rethinking the key categories of economic thought from the current that underlie these 8 systemic disconnects, from the current mainstream of economic thinking that's based on ecosystem awareness, to an extended framework of economic thinking that includes the level of ecosystem awareness, and thereby addresses the current blind spot of economic thought, which is consciousness. Because the moment you move the consciousness from ego to eco, in that moment, the laws of economic behavior are morphing, shifting from one state to another state. And what we believe is that really the only way of fundamentally addressing these key issues here requires us, among others, to shift the awareness from which we operate in most of our systems today from ego to eco, which puts the following question to the center of our attention. What's the social technology? What really is the process that allows us to move a given stakeholder system from ego to eco? And what it takes, we believe, is a journey. It's that kind of journey, that convenes these people, has them walk in each other's shoes and experience each other's perspectives, that is helping them to connecting to the deeper sources of knowing, and then helping them to explore new ideas by doing. And essentially, really having been in many of these processes, here's what essentially happens in these processes. It's moving a mindset that is operating from that point of view, which is seeing the system as something out there, to it's shifting that kind of mindset to another way of seeing the system that includes my own role as part of the whole. That's extending the view of others by including myself, including the way I'm contributing to the system. And what I'm really saying here is that at the core of the mind-matter shift that we face, at the core of the mind-matter split that we face in almost all social systems, social economic systems today around the world, is that kind of shift in awareness. To reintegrate mind and matter today in the social world requires us to go from that move, seeing the system out there, to seeing myself as part of the whole. And what that really means is that it puts, when you look at this process here, you see there's this part of the process, the co-sensing, and then there's this part of the process, bringing the new into the world. But in between, there is a space of nothingness. And that nothingness, that's where the process is broken. And then in that nothingness, we have to investigate the 2 root questions of creativity that are at center stage this week. Who is myself and what is my work? And this week, we primarily explore this question on us as individuals. But if we apply it in the context of the iceberg model, in the context of transforming capitalism, we also eventually need to have this conversation as a community. We need to ask ourselves, what really is the future that we want to create as a society, as a community, and what is the purpose of business in order to bring that type of future about. So it's that kind of question that we want to seed. And what we see here is that, and you remember the title of this lab is Transforming Business, Society, and Self. And why is it actually that in order to transform business and society towards 4.0, we also need to transform self? That has to do with the capacity of turning around the perspective and cultivating a new quality of relationships that we have as stakeholders with each other, where I open up and am able to internalize all the well-being and all the interest of the other stakeholders in the system, and where we create supporting environments for new types of initiatives that, once they're generated, help us kind of to develop a new quality of entrepreneurship that creates flourishing and well-being not only for a few, but for all.